Theresa May nudged Donald Trump to turn around and face the cameras at G20 summit. Theresa May had to nudge Donald U.S. President to pay attention at the G20 summit today, as they geared up for talks in Hamburg. The Prime Minister had to tap the President on the shoulder to face the cameras while he was daydreaming and failed to realize they were posting for a picture. However, the U.S. President appeared to bring the German Chancellor, Angela Merkel, to despair, as she was pictured with her head in her hands. Theresa May has to nudge Donald Trump to look at the cameras today. The U.S. President then spins around to pose for the cameras. But then the Prime Minister appeared to reach out towards him in other photographs. The German Chancellor had her head in her hands after chatting to President Trump. Theresa May was snapped with her body facing away from President Trump today. The pair chatted before talks in Germany. German Chancellor Angela Merkel was also present, center. All the leaders had a family photo this morning. U.S. President Donald Trump shakes hands with Russia's Vladimir Putin at G20 summit. Mrs. May and President Trump are set to have one-on-one talks together this afternoon. Earlier today she vowed to be bold in wake of her election disaster as she prepared to challenge President Trump and the Saudis today. The Prime Minister said this morning the election didn't come out as I hoped it would, but she refused to sit back and do nothing. World leaders had descended on Hamburg in Germany today to discuss a range of global issues, including counter-terrorism and climate change. This is the first time Mrs. May will face them since the election last month, where she lost a handful of seats and her majority in parliament. She told the press today that didn't come out as it hoped I would. She went on, "There's two ways the government can react to that. We can be very timid and sit back, or we can be bold, and that's what we are going to be." The PM also said she will tell President Trump how disappointed the UK was that the US decided to pull out of the Paris climate change agreement, and that she hopes they will find a way to come back into it. The pair will hold talks together in formal meetings this afternoon, where she will say she does not think the agreement needs to be renegotiated. They last met in Italy earlier this year, where they discussed a post-Brexit trade deal. On the menu for leaders at the G20 summit: starter, smoked fish, chilled soup, cottage cheese main, chicken fricassee, crayfish, black rice dessert, fruit. She met the German Chancellor, Angela Merkel, this morning. President Trump at the G20 for talks with other world leaders. Theresa May says she will ensure there is nowhere to hide for terrorists online. But the visit came as they attempted